Hello, interwebs. I hope you are all doing well, and I am super, super excited today because I have a very special guest, one of my favorite writers and authors, the one, the only Una McCormack. I'm so excited to talk with you today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks ever so much. I love coming on your podcast, Jessie. You always say nice things. I go away feeling an inch taller. And I'm only 5 foot tall, so it really matters.
Well, see, so do you go on podcasts where people don't say nice things about you? Are they always just
Oh, well,
Una
they do.
McCormack, I
That's
hate her. Here we go. Let's let's
Oh,
let's
she's
talk about it.
here. She's dreadful. Yeah. She's hear what we've been saying. It's the only reason I podcast. I only choose people who are nice to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's generally a good way to go. Yeah, yeah,
In life in general. Listeners, that's my advice.
yeah. Yes, it's very good advice. But yeah, we're here to talk about listeners two novels that she recently came out with. The first of which is a Star Trek book, which is Star Trek Strange New Worlds Asylum, where she gets to write about her actual namesake, Una Chin Riley, which we'll talk about too. And then I don't have the physical copy of this one, but we're also gonna be talking about, I'll probably put up the picture on here,
Mhm,
Doctor Who Caged, which is a 15th Doctor novel that also recently came
mhm.
out in the past year, right? It came out this
It
year in
did.
2025.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I only
You've been
wrote it at the
busy.
start of the year, so it's been a busy year. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would expect so. So we'll start off with Asylum, then go into Doctor Who, and then also just briefly mention up at the top, you have written a an essay for this wonderful book called Strange Novel
Mm,
Worlds, about Vonda N. McIntyre, who is a Star Trek tie-in fiction author that everyone should
mhm.
know. So we'll briefly talk about that towards the end as well. So a lot to talk about because you've been super busy.
Indeed. I have been super busy. I've been working very hard.
Yeah, just hiding in a corner, just like writing away. It's like, yes, I will write.
Pretty much, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, just to check on what month it is June, isn't
I
it?
think, yeah, I think that's about right. You're
Yeah, that sounds
close.
about
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. How do you feel
Yeah.
about 2025? You know?
How do I feel about it? Well, it's a long way off, isn't
Yeah, yeah,
it?
yeah. Very, very far
Ages
off.
away.
Well, speaking of the future,
Mhm,
let's start with Strange New Worlds.
mhm.
Because like I said before, and listeners, we're gonna stay spoiler free for the most part. And then we'll get into spoilers. I'll give a fair warning when we do get into spoilers about the book, and also down below, I'll probably put in the YouTube thing. They allow you to like section off section, so it'll be there for you. But staying
Yeah.
spoiler free. Yeah. What was the impetus for this novel? I mean, I know the obvious one is sort of like, oh, Una writing Una, which is
Well, I mean, it really was probably as simple as that. So,
yeah,
as usual these days, they kind of come to me,
yeah.
and they had a slot for a Strange New Worlds book,
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Really, it's got to be about Una Chin Riley, hasn't it?" And I said, Probably, really, it does." And then I think, so originally it was meant to be, we were meant to be tying it in with season three, but of course, the
Yeah,
writer strike hit,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we watched the strike go on, and we're kind of going, come on, guys, get that deal,
Get moving, get
um,
moving. Yeah, yeah,
get
yeah. To
get
the
moving.
studios, not to the writers, but yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exactly that.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Come on, studio, collapse. Oh, well,
Mhm.
not collapse, but
Well,
give in. Like,
yeah,
you know,
they could do with a little bit of breaking
we
apart, but
could
that's a different
we
discussion for a
we
different
could
day.
rebuild a kind of,
Yeah,
workers' collective on top, I'm sure, and still
yeah.
produce Star Trek. But that didn't happen. So, the kind of publishing schedule wasn't changing, obviously, because it
Hmm.
had nothing to do with that. So we kind of looked at it. We went, well, sadly, that outline we need to do some tweaking to.
Hmm.
So we just pulled it back into season two. So there's sort of a lost novel, which
Yeah, yeah,
when you've seen season three, I'll go, this is what this was going to be.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but on the whole, I think we did okay. I think we managed to. It was quite hard for me because I think as you write an outline, you start to imagine what that book is going to be like,
Yeah,
and you
yeah, yeah.
start to sense your way through it. And I just had to, like when a record scratches and you lift it up, I just right, stop that,
Yeah.
erase that timeline, and
Yeah,
come
yeah.
back. But I think the way that we had to change it, and obviously I'm staying a bit nebulous,
Hmm.
I think it probably worked in the book's favor. It sort of tightened it and focused it on for one thing, it sort of focused it more on the relationship between Pike and Una when they were younger. And I think that probably works to the book's advantage, to be honest. So so yeah, we sort of ended up with this split structure, And I thought it would be interesting to sort of look at the genesis of the relationship,
Hmm.
and then have a kind of have a story in the future that connected back to this. But at the other end, which was after they'd kind of had full disclosure between each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so it's to kind of take that whole trajectory of that relationship, I think. Yeah, I think it works okay. It's all
Yeah,
right.
no, no. I was, I mean, I was about to say, like, I'm surprised to hear you say that it was supposed to be a tie-in novel to season three, because a
Mm,
lot of what this book deals with feels like it's. I mean, obviously, I haven't seen season three, so I'm sure there's
mm.
something that feels very direct to that. But this feels like it fits so well coming right out of the second season episode. I'm blanking on the title of the episode, but the trial episode
Uh,
with Una.
yeah, I
Uh,
blank on it as well.
oh, Ad Aspera
Ad
per Aspera,
Aspera per. Yeah,
the
that's the
Latin,
one.
the
I
Latin
get
one.
the Latin one. I get the Astras and the Asperas mixed up, and I shouldn't because
Hmm.
I've got an A level in Latin, but it was
See,
a
you have
long
no
time ago.
excuse. I, I,
It was
I'm fine. I can get away with
well,
it.
it's so long ago. It was practically a live language when I was doing it. But
Yeah,
okay, so,
yeah.
but yeah, after that one. So and I sort of in my head, it's slightly after tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow
Yeah,
as
because
well.
you have some vague references to La'an going through some stuff. You don't call it out
Yeah.
specifically, which I really liked, because you can listening to the novel. I was like, oh yeah, La'an's dealing with some stuff from that. She just saw sexy Kirk get killed.
Yeah, my possibly my favorite of that season, actually. I
Really?
thought that was
Yeah. Yeah.
incredible episode. Really two strong ones. Anyway, we're not talking about them, we're talking about me. So
Yeah, yeah, done with them. But yeah,
yeah.
getting into that. But yeah, it fit really, really well. I think it's a good
Mm,
sort of bookend between, like, here's how they started the relationship and here's how they began. And yeah, I'm just sort of curious, like, how you sort of went about looking at this. Is sort of staying in the spoiler free range
mm,
of how Una was dealing with, in both points in her life,
mm.
not being out, as it were, as a genetically
Yeah,
modified person. So.
yeah. So that was definitely the grist for the first part. So I thought it would be good to kind of it worked in my favor that I had to pull it back to season
Mm-hmm.
two, because then I could kind of go, oh right, okay, now I know the sort of emotional trajectory of this. She's
Yeah.
dealing with the aftermath of that and
Mm-hmm.
discovering that, obviously the trial was dreadful and she had no idea what the outcome of that would be, but that she could kind of look around and go, I'm kind of loved and supported and admired,
Yeah.
and that's quite a nice place to be in. And then you go back to this much younger Una, who is also admired and supported, but at the same time has this kind of lie that she's living, which
Mm-hmm.
always makes her feel duplicitous, or that she's being dishonorable in some way, or that
Mm-hmm.
she can't risk it. She just, it will mean the end of everything. And she's right. It nearly does mean the end of everything. They just get a good lawyer in.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Everyone
And
needs a good lawyer.
when
Yeah.
I watched that episode, um, that word asylum came out, and I went, well, that's what the book's got to be about, hasn't it? Because I think what you're doing when you're writing an outline, you're constantly going, what's my main theme? And once I've
Mm-hmm.
got that, and it's probably going to be the title as well, then you could just start unfolding the rest of the plot. 'Cause you got to fill 90,000 words. So, you got to, needs to
Yeah,
come up
yeah,
with a plot and some characters. So immediately, the obvious thing to do seemed to be to involve a group of asylum seekers
yeah.
in some way, and have personal ramifications for young Una, who sort of is pulled to them emotionally, but then realizes it's taking her into places which are going to risk her own position. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the thought processes, and then have that kind of play out in the future. So I think they're fairly straightforward choices.
Yeah.
But hopefully they make sense. And
No, they made perfect sense. And that was like the dual. So for listeners, just to give a
Mm,
quick summary of the story. Their story takes place in two timelines. In sort of the past timeline, we have Una at Starfleet Academy, and she is sort of dealing with all the stress of Starfleet Academy. And then she also goes and helps a group of asylum seekers
mm,
who have moved to the Federation from a planet called Zio. And they are, Kana. Hopefully I'm getting this correct, but a sort of
Yuksana.
Yoksana. I have a cheat sheet on the side here of like, I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly. It's hard to do it when you're reading a book of like, how does this actually
Yeah.
sound? It's a lot of Z's and Y's and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Poor Robert Petkoff who read
Yep,
it.
yep. Um, but yes, they're asylum seekers. They're basically a cultural group from a planet that is being persecuted. And so she helps them, but then due to her own situation, again, we'll get into spoilers in a little bit. Due to her own
Mm,
situation, is also someone who is hiding her own situation as someone who is genetically modified, which is illegal in the Federation. It becomes complicated, and then in the future, the Federation is opening a diplomatic dialogue with the planet itself, and slowly learning about the situation that the cultural
yeah.
group is sort of dealing with in the present day, and Una sort of now out as a genetically modified
Mm,
person, sort of dealing with that. So the reason I share all of that, just for give listeners context, is sort of set off the conversation. What I really loved about this novel, in particular about Una's characterization, is just her perspective at the
mm.
different points on how to deal with these situations, and how both of them, just from who she is, both like gave her an impetus to want to do things, but also prevented her from doing certain things at different times, which I really loved. And I'm curious to talk about like how you got into Una's head about that.
Yeah, so Una is the most straightforward and
Mm-hmm.
honorable person. Yeah, there's no everything is by the book and clear, and there's no complications except except it's all based on this subterfuge.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I thought that's and you don't have to look very far for analogous examples. What an incredibly difficult way to go about living your life.
Yeah.
To be in this position of authority, you're admired, you've built a career, you have colleagues who respect you, and everything about these relationships is based on a concealment.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional drain that must be, and to sustain that over decades, I found that profoundly affecting. And it was good to be able to write her released from that and to realize when she's released that her friends don't give a jot, except insofar as how it's harmed her or
Mm-hmm.
might have harmed her. But also to go back where she's when she's at the academy, I think the story I wanted to delve into was her realizing what this was going to mean. Yeah. That she
Mm-hmm.
sort of, the academy has protected her in some way. She's got in, she's excelling, she's doing brilliantly, but she sort of has this first moment where she realizes that to sustain this deception, she's going to have to make choices that she will not find palatable.
Yeah.
And I wanted to explore what that experience would be like. And it's sort of her first experience of not being the person that she wants to be in her own eyes.
Yeah.
And it's not her fault. Yeah. She's
No, but
locked
she
in
takes
this.
it on. She takes it
Yeah.
on as a fault. Yeah.
Takes it on. And she does have to do a thing that she doesn't admire. And she steps back from this group of refugees that she's helping for plot reasons.
Yeah.
But she doesn't admire it. And, it makes her best friend at the time look at her with new eyes and go, oh, that wasn't the person I thought you were. That seems a rather selfish act. Of course,
Yeah.
it's not. There are other reasons, but to have to live with that original choice, whether we're going to call it passing or being in the
Yeah.
closet or whatever, and all of these kind of could be analogous. She's having to sustain this lie in all her relationships, and it's a very poignant and difficult story to start out in life with that kind of weight on you, um, and then because you don't just want a story about that,
Yeah.
to be able to go to the future and go, but no, that's
That
that's not how it turns out, because we're in Star Trek
that's the
and the
thing. It's
world
Star
turns
Trek
out
is
to
hope.
be
Yeah.
exactly, it's liberatory, it's diverse. It doesn't it doesn't condemn as a group of people as a block. It says, well, there are reasons for this, and maybe the law isn't good. Let's not harm this individual. Let's find a way through. If it means getting a smart lawyer, then let's do
Let's
that.
do it. Yeah, you don't have to pay for them. It's great. Love
Exactly.
love that feature. Um, But yeah, I think like the most heartbreaking scene for me was like
Mm.
there was that scene where she does have to choose to step away from the group of refugees in the past, and the person keeps going like, okay, I understand, but why? And can tell that she's stressed out,
Mm.
and Una all she can say is just, I'm too busy with work. I'm too busy with work from the academy,
Yeah.
and you can
Yeah.
tell that she has obviously so much more that's going on, but just can't say it, and it broke my heart for her
It's
at that
really
point.
hard.
Yeah,
I think Pelia gets close at moments.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but then, sort of thinks, well, I think probably people just don't they wouldn't sort of go, this is exactly how someone would behave if they were genetically modified. It's
yeah, yeah.
it's not something that's going to go through their mind. I think Pelia senses maybe that there's something else. But then
Hmm.
Una turns it round. Una kind of goes, look, I've made these decisions. Here's my paper. It's all of these things. Una turns it round,
Yeah.
and so Pelia kind of goes, okay, well, that everybody gets stressed. Maybe this was just the moment where she got stressed, and
Mm.
Pelia backs away. Although we won't get to spoil this yet, but somebody does work it out, don't they? And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
make decisions based on that. Yeah, but I thought to be able to look into that, how that felt really, because they don't often in the show they kind of give you the broad brush of it.
Mhm.
But in the novel, you've got the opportunity to go, well, actually, how might that have felt? What would
Yeah.
that experience have been like? It would have been very lonely, I think. Just
Yeah.
really, which makes Pike a very welcome addition to her life. Somebody who is just likes her and admires her
Yeah.
and is pretty uncomplicated. I think the nice thing about Pike is that he's pretty uncomplicated.
No, he's like the perfect and this will I want to actually jump into spoilers on this point because
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
something that this book continued it. But one of the
Mm.
things that I liked about the trial episode was it showed Pike being a really good ally for someone in that
Yeah.
situation. Like he really modeled it because there's that point in the episode where he goes and gets the lawyer for Una, and he actually puts
Hmm.
his life on the line at one point. Like he's not going to die, but he does put himself in a dangerous situation
Yeah.
to help her,
Hmm.
which is what allies should do in that situation, of like try to put themselves at the front, in
Hmm.
front of other people to be able to protect them. And I thought that he modeled that really well. And
Hmm.
this is we're gonna get into spoilers because um I this is the what I really loved about this novel in particular is when you have Pike in the past at Starfleet Academy, he can sense
Mm.
something's going on and he's just supportive. And then when you go into the future, where we again, here's where we're going to be getting into kind of spoilers, and this
Mm.
is where it gets dark, and we'll talk more about that part of it. But he basically starts to learn, they start to learn that they are dealing with a planet that is committing a cultural genocide.
Hmm.
Um, against the Yaxana. And Pike, I think also at this point is not entirely getting it in a way that Una is getting it very
Yeah.
quick, but he's remaining open to hearing what she has to say. And I appreciated that part of it where he is someone sort of like has that Federation establishment mindset. It's
Yeah.
like, but Una understands much quicker. And I'm curious,
Yeah.
like you capturing that that sort of uh spot for Pike in both those.
Yeah, I think partly because she has met the Yuksana before, so she's met them when she's young, so she's got this entirely different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe now you say it, maybe because
Mm-hmm.
she's experienced something similar, and can sympathize with them. Pike is sort of stuck in that captain role, isn't he? Where he's kind
Yeah.
of going, oh, God, I've got this diplomatic mission. Yeah, there's
Yep.
ambassadors, and we've got to keep things. There's a little bit of face saving that needs to go on, and what are the limits of what we can do? Because we can't send Enterprise in to sort of tell these people to stop doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think also he's there to kind of has Una got too emotionally invested? Do I need to be
Mm-hmm.
pulling her back? But I think what's great about the pair of them is they're such a good tag team. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's one will push the other. And he doesn't lie to her. I mean, he says, we there are things we can't do, things I can't do with the Enterprise, things I'd like to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I love to just go in there and tell him what to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, but I'm not going to get away with that. We're not going to get away with that. So what do
Mm-hmm.
we have to do to make this work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, they kind of work as each other's they're like a moral tag team for each other, aren't they? They kind
Yeah.
of yeah, he might take risks and she might pull him up, or she might push him and he will go, well, come on, there's limits here to what we can do. So they're good to write as a kind of professional team, I think. Um, and ultimately they do just like and admire each other. And I think that's a really nice thing to write about.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just like you made me just realize this is like they're both kind of idealists, but they come from it from different perspectives of like Pike is sort of he's not a marginalized person in this, whereas Una is, but they both kind of uphold
Mm.
that same sort of like ideal, but they're both going to have different perspectives on the same issue, yet still want to go for the same thing.
And Pike's interesting because of course he's had that kind of glimpse of his future.
Mm-hmm.
There's something I've said this lots of times. There's something a little bit melancholy about him, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something that sort of knows he's on borrowed time.
Mm-hmm.
So he's living with this knowledge of his own extinction. And that I think sort of even back when Trek's is its most optimistic, yeah, it's a very late Trek show, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of dealing with the knowledge of Pike's decline and his
Yeah.
own self-knowledge of that. And I think that makes him a little bit more I think it makes him value the present. Yeah.
Yeah.
That all the while that he's loving the risk and the adventure and being in Starfleet, he's thinking moments like this they're gonna go, and they're
Yeah.
gonna go sooner than I would like. And so I need to experience them and not be thinking about what that future is and not regretting that, but being glad that I'm here with
Yeah.
one of my best friends
Yeah.
making an omelette, yeah,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
I love that. I love that ending too. It's just like him relating the whole story to just
Yeah.
omelet making at the end. I thought was really beautiful
Yeah.
and very Pike, very Pike. And like I could see
It
him in
is
his
very
apron.
Pike.
It's like, oh,
Yeah,
just cook me
yeah.
food. I am here for it.
Cook me here, and I will eat it. Whatever you cook for me, Una,
Yeah,
I will appreciate it's made with love.
yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me want to see Cisco versus Pike cook off. I feel like that would be a
Oh my
fascinating show.
goodness. Who do you think would oh, that's a
Oh,
good
that
question.
is a good. I feel like, let me put
Mm.
it this way. I feel like Pike might be like a better show. Like he'd win in the style department, but Cisco's would be like
Yeah.
have a lot more bursting of flavor. I feel like
I
would
think
be
you're
the spice.
right. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you're right. But they're just such great. I love how they're both family men. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
gather round my hearth,
Yeah.
and I, the great chief,
We'll cook
you
food for
know,
you. Yeah.
we'll make for you a lovely tasty casserole. I mean,
Uh, it is
it's
beautiful.
lovely with both of them, and that it's cooking as well. But not that it's chefing, yeah.
Hmm.
It's like home cooking, yeah.
Yeah.
It's nurture. And I love that with both of them, that it's a kind of, it's coded as nurture like that is coded as yeah, like if it was barbecue or something, it wouldn't be as good.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's
very found
literally
family. It's very like create a space for family to grow.
exactly that, and it's cooking home food
Yeah.
and being around the table, but not swanning into carve. Yeah, you've
Yeah.
done the chopping and involve people in it and this sort of thing. I
Yeah.
love that with both of them. It really subverts the kind of macho stuff. But
Yeah.
oh
Very
yeah,
Trek.
Cisco and Pike
Yeah, yeah.
swapping recipes.
Man, that'd be that's it's one of those things where it's like, ah, we'll probably never get that on screen, but man, I would love
Yeah.
that at some point one day.
Well,
Maybe write a
we've put
book.
it out.
Yeah, yeah.
We've put it out there now, guys. So I want AO3 within the week. Yeah.
I demand it.
It's
Um,
probably there already. Yeah.
oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a cook-off thing. Like Star Trek cooking show would be fun. Um, well, the thing, so let's switch into something kind of darker, unfortunately, but I think
Mhm.
what I to compliment you again, and maybe this is sadly a backhanded compliment, but what I do really think you do so well in a lot of your novels, and it's something we'll even talk about in the Doctor Who one, is
Mm,
you are unflinching from looking at really dark subject matter,
mhm,
um, and showing how and really understanding how like things like cultural genocides work, um,
mhm.
and I know that that's kind of again backhanded compliment, like you know how these sort of things work, but you kind of showcase it in a really in a way that makes people understand
Mm.
how these things function. And one of the elements of this book that I found really fascinating, especially given like modern context, even though it
Mm.
doesn't, maybe you were, but it didn't seem like you were drawing any particular conflict today, but it sort of was a broad brush as Star Trek does,
Yeah.
was the change in what was happening on Zio in the two different timelines. Because in the present day or in the past, you have the asylum seekers, and you get a sense that
Yeah.
there are people who are running away because they know that this is a really bad situation. And it is a form of genocide because they're being re-educated and things like that, trying
Yeah.
to destroy their culture. But a lot of it is like, spoiler too. There's one member of the family they have to shun away just because he was making jokes
Yeah.
about the culture. Whereas in
Mm.
the modern day, you hear that it's become much more violent, the situation. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sort of curious, like your research process and how you sort of got into sort of depicting that timeline of how this sort of happens.
So, my
Sorry, it's a
research.
dark subject.
No, yeah, it's well, it's what the book's about. I don't really have a research process. I know a friend of mine got me in to talk to his undergraduate writing
Mm-hmm.
class about research, and I said I don't do research. She said that's stop now. That's not what I brought you in to say. But
Kids, don't do any research,
kid,
just write.
don't do kids just right. What I do, and I think this is what people mean by research, is that I
Mm.
read quite a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think quite a lot. And because I don't really go out much and talk to people because I'm a
yeah,
writer.
yeah, yeah.
So I read quite a lot. And then when I start to think about a book about asylum seekers, and what that might mean and the reasons why that
Mhm.
might happen, then I think I've probably got a lot of resources that I can draw on. If I was going to specify anything, I think the sort of thing that's been at the back of my mind is what's been happening in China with the
Mhm.
Uyghur Muslim
Yeah, yeah,
population,
yeah.
and perhaps a little bit because it's not far from my mind, is so I'm sort of my grandfathers were Irish, and
Yeah, yeah.
I recently got my Irish passport. I've been learning Irish, so those sorts of things about
What happened?
colonialism and
Yeah,
loss
yeah.
of language and diaspora, and what it means to be maybe second or third generation were all at the back of my mind. So
Yeah.
that's a sort of, I mean, I'm about as privileged as they come, but that's family history.
Mhm.
So I'm not there. I'm here because of certain historical facts, and you reflect on where you came from. So some of that will have gone in, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and then the sort of history that I had in my mind was almost that this has gone unnoticed pretty much. These refugees are coming out, but in the early part of the book, I mean, you should almost feel that it's almost sadly, it's almost a done deal for the Yuksana.
Yeah.
It's just a process of dwindling away. Unfortunately, what I think the Keynesians haven't banked on is that once people start going out in the diaspora, then they start to be able to get the word out.
Yeah.
They start to make connections. They start to make networks. And what you're seeing now is that generation growing up and either going back and saying, "Look, you can't touch me. I'm from the Federation," or else working within the Federation to raise awareness. And I think as the people from Zio start to meet the Federation, it naturally brings them into conversation with that. They can't sustain a kind of silence over this. So that's sort of what I had in mind going
Mm.
on. I hope it's a convincing history, a sort of convincing narrative. But I think
No.
once people start to leave, once that diaspora happens, um, you're telling that story, and people go, "Well, that's not right."
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
it's
Well,
not okay.
it reminded me too of like just something I was reading about. I
Mm.
was reading about sadly the very horrible situation going on in Palestine with to
Yep.
Palestinians right now. And one of the things in that history was like why we have such an awareness of it now that we do is a lot of
Mm.
Palestinians leaving and entering into academia, and that creating
Yep.
a lot of like writing about Palestine in those spaces that have sort of filtered out more. into our
Yeah.
discussions today. So yeah, it's part of that
And other things as
diaspora.
well, like I was in Berlin, was it this year? No, it was last year.
Hmm.
And I got into a taxi and my taxi driver's Palestinian. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, okay.
Having
So you're
conversations and yeah,
exactly, yeah, because there's a diaspora out there and where they're going to end up. And maybe New York, maybe London, maybe Berlin. They're going to be in cities. They're going to be driving your taxis. And you're going to think,
hmm,
well, oh, I wonder how you ended up here. How come you're here?
yeah,
Well, we
yeah,
we know the story. So yeah, the people get out and they tell
yeah,
their tales. Yeah.
yeah.
This is how I got here. This is what happened. This is why I had to leave. Yeah. So that was sort of at the back of my mind, just to explore some of that. And as I say, lots and lots and lots of different sources it could be. I
Yeah.
think what I'm
Oh yeah.
interested in, yeah, is sort of going, well, if you take away what we know, if you take away our own histories or the histories that are there, then it lets us deal with it in a way that's not going to let our passions inflame. We
Yeah.
can just look at, well, these are the processes. This is what happens. This is what happens to people, or how they might be affected, what it might be like to live like that. And you can kind of go, well, it's big cats, yeah, in this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm sad about those big cats. That should be happening to those big cats. That's a
Yeah.
terrible thing to do to lovely big cats. Well,
Yeah, I
okay,
love that you
well,
talk
and
about the
now
cubs and I just like the cat element of it. I thought was very, very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. That was well, we're going to come to Vonda, but that was a sort of nod to Vonda McIntyre, who has
Oh,
lots of
yeah.
lovely cat aliens in her books. So let's do
Yeah.
cats.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Star Trek does, though, right? Like the whole point
Mm,
of Star Trek is to extrapolate it out from our current context, so like you can see the dynamics without the prejudice of the moment. So,
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just sort of go, okay, well, right, that's not okay, is it?
no, yeah, yeah. One other element of it too that I really, and this is something that I kind of really enjoy Strange New Worlds for, is just a show, and I think you captured it really well, is how everyone reacts to it differently. Not we've been talking about like Una and Pike having different reactions to
Mm,
as they're learning, but there's a really wonderful scene that I thought was one of a personal favorite where Una, there's for listeners, there's a moment in the story where a an activist, we don't know who it is yet, is like shining different like Yoksanan freedom propaganda around and doing sort of things like that, shining
mm.
it on the Enterprise. Did you get inspired by, I'm curious if that was inspired by people shining lights on buildings like on the Trump
Oh,
Tower
it
and like
must
this.
have been.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All of this stuff goes in and then pops out. I'm just writing, going, oh, something's
Yeah.
got to happen now. Oh, I know. Well, let's put some stuff on the internet. It must have been. Yeah.
Yeah, just someone projecting a like a freedom declaration, like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
manifesto onto the Enterprise. I'm like, that feels very much like trans activists or whatever activists like shining a light on the Trump
Exactly
Tower or
that.
whatever.
Yeah.
But there's a beautiful moment in there where Una, not Una, excuse me, Uhura, is sort of reading the language and learning about the language of the Yoksanans. I'm probably mispronouncing again, but like learning about the language and like how they think about the world through language,
Mm,
because she's a linguist and she finds a lot of beauty in that. And we also learn from there, like that creates a conversation on the bridge, and you have Spock kind of being like, well, I don't really approve of violent actions because of
mm,
Vulcan's histories with like the logic extremists.
yeah.
And it was just this really interesting, like, I didn't agree with everybody's perspective on there, but it was, I think you did a really great, and this weaves throughout the whole book of like everyone's perspectives and reactions to indigenous people fighting back, or like
Hmm.
this sort of cultural genocide happening, and not either like trying to learn how it works. Like I'm curious, like again, how you got into everyone's mindsets and how they sort of reacted to it.
Yeah, so that's my favorite scene in the book. That's
Yeah.
Spock, Uhura, and Ortegas, isn't it? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my favorite scene in the book partly because I just love the conflict because I'm a massive nerd. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
talking about grammar is really good fun. Um, and to let Uhura be geeky about the things she loves, and they
Mm-hmm.
felt very in character when I was writing them. But also, it's a direct lift from learning Irish, so that whole
Mm.
stuff about autonomous verbs. is straight from what I
Oh,
learned
yeah, yeah.
from Irish. I'm probably getting it wrong because I'm not very good.
It's Star Trek. You, if it's wrong, you
It's
just
all
say, "Well,
right.
that's how the aliens do." Yeah,
It's the aliens do it that way. But I loved
yeah.
this idea of having a passive voice. As I understand it, Irish doesn't have a passive voice. It has this thing which is an autonomous verb. So in a passive voice, we would say, a brick was thrown
Mm,
by Una. Yeah.
hmm.
Whereas you can't you can sort of do that construction, but mostly it's a bit more like uh throwing of bricks occurred. Yeah. I absolutely love. It's kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, but you try and pin it on one of us, mate. You know.
yeah, yeah. We all
I
did it. We
love
all,
it.
yeah,
Yeah. It's a kind of deniability, or there's something very funny about that construction that I
yeah,
love. The action of brick throwing
yeah.
was was happening, which I
Mm,
love. The sort of non let's lean into the passive and
yeah,
make it completely non-attributable. So I really really love that. It struck me as the kind of thing Uhura would love. I thought she would love that. It was nice to explore her enthusiasm for language, and of course, language is just such this important part of um, cultural identity. Obviously, yeah,
mm,
cultural identity, but languages that are disappearing. Um, I imagine that if any Yuksana activist could have listened in on that scene and heard Uhura responding kind of intellectually and emotionally to their language, would have absolutely loved it.
mm.
To feel that the kind of the language is being spoken and passive, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's what the whole scene is about. The language is heard by Uhura, the language is spoken by Uhura, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to be heard. They wanted
yeah,
someone to hear them. So I just love that scene. It feels like the heart of the book. And Uhura is so open to it. And open, she's got this incredible intelligence and analytical ability, but it's the music of it that inspires her. It's the particularity of it, what that language means as a practiced, lived um, form of communication. That's what Uhura loves. And also the verbs are really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So it's
Well,
the heart of the book for me. I love that scene. Yeah.
well, I think that it's for me. I'm trying to think of how to explain this because I think
Mm.
again that's why I again complimenting you. I adore your writing so much is because in even like talking about something as difficult as genocide, you find
Mm.
these moments of beauty of what to hold on to, and in many ways that makes it much more tragic and much harder.
Yeah.
But the way you find the beauty in that, I think, is the strength of it. Because something I wrote about recently is there's like
Mm.
there was there was the Avatar: The Last Airbender show, and they
Yeah.
depict the genocide of the Airbenders in the live action
Mm.
show, and it's like, well, that doesn't really hit as hard. I mean, it's horrible to see. Obviously, it's awful, but it
Mm.
doesn't get at this like profound loss of this culture in a way that I
Yeah.
think the animated show really did.
Yeah.
Another one that I did too, and I realized how much of a visceral reaction I had to it. Sorry, I'm ranting at you, but it was just Octavia Butler's Dawn. I was reading
Yeah.
that, and she talks about how humans in that at the beginning of the book, like they're not allowed, the aliens in that book are not going to allow humans to have their culture, to keep it,
Yep.
just sort of erase it. And
Hmm.
I felt like such a visceral reaction to that. And I think that that's what you
Yep.
capture really well. Is just like this beauty of this thing that is being erased.
It's been lost, yeah. But hopefully we're feeling there's a moment now in
Mm-hmm.
this book
Mm-hmm.
that the word got out, literally, the
Yeah.
words were all over the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody did get to somebody who was, had to run away, put
Mm-hmm.
together a grammar. And now somebody on the flagship is looking at this grammar. And have you watched Reservation Dogs?
Oh yeah,
Uh
I'm
yeah.
quite literally. It's funny you mentioned that. I'm working on a video for my channel that is talking
Mhm.
about similar situations, that talks about that there's that one scene in the prison that I really love
Yeah.
about like
Yeah.
the tips and spreading of community. So
Exactly that. I just absolutely love that show. I could go back to it again and again and again. It reminds me, it's similar. There's a great show called Derry Girls, which is
oh, I've heard of it.
a
Yeah, yeah.
comedy. Yeah, have a look if you can. It's they're not they don't overlap in the same way. Derry Girls is more broadly comic, but
Mm-hmm.
behind it, I think it does have these. Sometimes it just touches on these questions of what it means to have been a marginalized community and all these
Yeah.
sorts of things. But Reservation Dogs, I just find the most profoundly good show. It's really, really good. That third season was a banger.
Oh, it
Yeah.
really was. It really was. And actually,
Really.
yeah,
Mm,
it was again, this is an aside, but I was
mm,
talking with a friend about it because I was who is Indigenous American. Um
mm,
and I was like, "Oh man, I was really sad that it was ending after only 3 seasons." Such a show that I thought was really beautiful. And
mm,
she had this really profound insight for me, which was, I think it's perfect that it ends at 3 seasons because, stories from our communities, different tribes, end. And it's all about
mm.
ending stories and starting new ones, where it's only Western stories where it's like you must continue it on and on and on and on and on and never gets to have a completion. Um,
Exactly. Yeah,
so
yeah, like Lost or something. But what I loved as well was that it had transmitted the culture through three
mhm,
generations. And so if
mhm.
you do want to lean forward, to Westerner that I am, what you've got is, it's like that little, it's like the candle's been carried
Yep.
and it nearly went out, but look,
It's
it's
still
just
flickering.
flickered up again in this group of kids. And that, well, maybe we can keep it, just nurture that flame a little bit longer and
Yep.
keep it going. And that's part of what the show is doing, I think, because, that show is made and some 50-year-old British Irish woman has watched it
Yep.
and has looked up and tried to find out how to say mukto.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, again, that's I mean, that's a story that I think we need a lot of
Mm,
today, which again, not to get too, we were talking before we started recording about the current goings on of the world,
mm,
and we were talking about that as that thing of like how we hold the candle and keep it sort of keep it going
mm.
and keeping the culture. So again, it's why I really love your work. I think you do such a
Thank you.
really beautiful job of like, hey, here's this really horrible thing, here's how it functions, how it works, especially in a Star Trek mindset. And then
Mm,
you sort of say, well, especially through a Star Trek lens of like, and here's the hope, even within this darkness and of how it can
yeah,
continue. I think you do just do a really beautiful job of that.
that's very kind, Jessie. I try my best.
So well, on that front, let's jump over to Doctor Who. We're going to talk Doctor Who
Yeah.
Cage, which is kind of very similar. Again, we'll stay spoiler free for a little bit, everybody, and then we'll jump
Hmm.
into spoilers in just a moment. Um, but I guess the easy first question on Doctor Who Caged is it's a 15th Doctor novel, and I'm curious
Hmm.
because you wrote it this year, and
Hmm.
for my mind, listening to it because I did the audiobook, you really captured the 15th Doctor's voice very, very well. And I was like, you had to be writing this before the series came
Yeah.
out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, it was very early.
Yeah.
So I sort of had a first draft, and then I thought, oh, I could do with a bit, yeah. And then the Christmas episode happened, and I was like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
fine now. I've kind of heard
I got it.
enough.
I got it. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, now we're good. Now we're sorted. So yeah, I think whenever you write the Doctor, and I've written
I think you've
I've
written every
written.
single one, right? Yeah. Of the modern
Oh
era?
no,
Of the
not
modern era?
of the modern era. Have I done?
You did
Yeah, unless I
11th,
can't.
unless you don't count 14th, but
I've not done 14. I've not done the Fugitive Doctor. Not yet.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I'd have to do that. But 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 4, not 14,
Yeah.
15. Yeah, I've got pretty good innings. Yeah. I think so I did one of the Jodie books
Mm,
when that was fun. So I think for three Doctors I've done one of the first set of books. So you haven't necessarily heard them. So I think particularly when you do first draft, if and they're great, they kind of give you scripts and
yeah.
give you access to material and that kind of thing. Um, you have to write the Doctor. You just write the Doctor. Yeah. Okay.
Mm,
What's the Doctor? Never cowardly, never cruel. All of that. Let's write the Doctor, and then they're all going to have their personality ticks, aren't they?
yeah.
But to some extent, it's a little bit harder with Shooty because he's got some kind of catchphrases that you couldn't imagine Hartnell saying babes. Yeah, all
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. It's just like
But then
I
you,
like
you
like the
couldn't
way he just
imagine
says
Hartnell
yeah,
saying yeah, you
yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
imagine Hartnell saying Geronimo. Yeah.
Mm,
But the substance of when the doctor's speechifying, I think you should be able to hear the doctor saying that. And it doesn't matter if it's Jodie Whittaker or Patrick Troughton.
mm,
When the doctor's kind of going, this is not right, this is wrong. Now you have to listen. This is where we're not going any further. I'm going to stop this. that's always got to sound like the Doctor. So to some extent, you kind of write the Doctor, and then you kind of go, well, what? I think it really helps to be able to see the move,
Mm.
particularly with this Doctor who's very kinetic, with Matt Smith's Doctor who is, like this. He's like a so it's like kind of like a friend of mine described it really well. He said it's filmed in widescreen, yeah, but the Doctor's still performing for a 4:3 television. So it's like this little
Yeah.
man in a with all these limbs trying to fit on screen. It's a lovely description of Matt Smith's
Oh,
Doctor.
that's really good,
So you,
actually. Yeah.
so you're writing the Doctor, and then you just got to get the kind of physicality and the particular quirks, get them right.
Mm.
Fingers crossed. Yep.
I think you really no, that was one of the things I was really impressed by because listening to it, I was like, wow, this really feels like Shooty. And you captured it. I was like,
Good.
there's no way you had seen that much of him at that point. Like obviously you probably would,
No,
but yeah.
not very much
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
But and of course the editor and the guys, it goes through the BBC as well, and they're going, well,
Hmm.
I tweak that he wouldn't say that, or he would be more active here. He would take a more proactive move, and you go, yeah, that's fair enough. So there's lots of kind of they've got their eye on the brand. So
Hmm.
there's lots of support nets. Yeah.
Good, good. Well, to get into staying just spoiler free up front, the story of it, I'm trying to think of how best to do it because this one's kind of really built on a mystery,
Mm.
and really built on what's kind of going on this world that they end up on. And I think the best invention you had for this was Cheerchar, which was this
Oh,
little like small little alien who feels very Star Trek, right? It was just like looking up at the
yeah.
sky and like I want to go and explore.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how did you kind of come up with this the concept for this story and Cheerchar in particular before we get into big spoilers?
So I was really stuck. Yeah.
Mm,
When I'm really stuck, what I do is I walk out of my office and I say to my other half, I need a plot. I need a
mm.
plot idea. And he said, uh, how about aliens getting abducted by aliens? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
Which is literally, I mean, we have this joke that his lines always get are the ones that people quote back to me, but to actually have his line on the cover is
That is really
what
funny.
what if aliens are abducted by aliens? And then we sort of talked about it a bit and said, well, that would be for an. I'm probably going to end up in spoilers here, but
That's fine.
that's just what to be. What if? Why do aliens abduct humans to kind of experiment on them? So okay, let's think
Mhm.
about experimentation. Well, wouldn't it be really funny if the aliens that the Doctor was dealing with are basically massive guinea pigs? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
the book was called Project Guinea Pig for a while, but we could
That's
that was kind of
adorable.
like its code name.
Yeah, yeah.
So Chirichar is just, and I actually did a little bit of research. I said did research. I kind of Googled guinea pig life or something.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. I
Yeah,
didn't catch that at first, but I can definitely see that now. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. I don't think it quite makes it into the book, but it might be on the back. The planet's called Cavia, which is kind of the Latin name and that kind of thing. So
Um,
they're so I sort of looked up I kind of Googled guinea pigs, lifestyle, whatever, and kind of went, well, what they like, what's the kind of like social structure
mm,
and this kind of
mm,
thing. Well, let's go past it, all the AI generated results and Wikipedia and find, some kind of scientific stuff. So I did a little bit about the, all sleeping together in heaps and the kind of little tunnels and this kind of thing. So you kind of build something. You could be a little bit more light touch in a Doctor Who book. I think you don't have to.
mhm.
I haven't got pages of autonomous verbs and that anything like that.
Don't need
Not
all the
not for these
science.
guys.
It's sciencey
Yeah,
wincy.
no,
It's fine. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You just need a flavor of it, really, and of course because you don't see them, then I don't ever have to say that these are guinea pigs. So
Yeah.
you can either work it out. You work out that basically, um, Ruby and the Doctor are just going, "Oh my God, they're so fluffy."
I did love Ruby just reacting. She's like, "Oh my God, I just want to keep petting you, but it would be
I know
rude."
it's like just not polite to just kind of
Mm,
stroke your lovely fur. But the pair of them like to each other go, so cute, it's just so nice.
mhm,
And Chirichar's just very trusting. It's a so there's a little bit of sort of thinking of she has no reason to mistrust. There's been no sort of alien encounters, but she's had this encounter. Um she's abducted, and is pondering this and what this might mean and what this means for her world. But she's a sort of very open and trusting character. And fortunately, the first people that she meets are the Doctor and Ruby. So
Mm,
she's kind of safe with them. But at the same time, she's not stupid. She's sort of, you can
yeah.
explain this to me. And if there's a difficult concept, or you can explain things like threats and danger and all of these, because I need to know the truth, because this is my world and my people. So you've got to give me the choices here. The
Mm,
doctor, I think she pulls up the doctor, it's typical kind of conversation with the doctor getting high-handed and a bit colonial himself. But Chirita kind of sticks in. And then it turns out, she's got a really good set of claws as well,
which can
You
come
really don't.
handy. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about it, and teeth. They're kind of nibbling through cables and things. So they were really fun. But I just wanted to make her not gauche or naive, but this is not something she's experienced. But so she has to learn very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so she's
Does
she's
quite
very
well.
sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of, let's get into spoilers on this
Mm,
too, because that was again, this is again why I love your work too. You really kind of captured that difficult, like, oh, this is what's happening, and yet still hope within
mm,
that through Chirchar. Because listeners, just spoilers for the story, it turns out that this experiment is a another alien species literally created them because they weren't able
mm,
to find aliens elsewhere, and so they wanted to create some life to have someone to interact with, and so they created this. But
mm,
at the same time, the rest of the culture has sort of shifted over the generations, and now wants to basically colonize this planet,
mm,
and very much make it into like just living quarters and things like that, and sort of take it over. Um, and what I liked about that, the Cheerchar side of it, was the loss of innocence in that, but not the
yeah.
loss of like this hopeful outlook on her
Yeah.
part and her culture's part. And I'm just curious again, your like thinking on that and how you sort of like balance that.
Yeah, she loses innocence, but she doesn't lose what she always had, which is a sense of right and wrong. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just because she's not experienced anything like this, she knows it's not okay to rock up and bulldoze a
Mm-hmm.
planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's not fun. It doesn't matter that you created us. It it
Yeah.
it just doesn't matter. We're still our own.
Yeah.
You just can't do that to people. That's not a
Yeah.
nice thing to do. It's a bad thing to do. So yeah, I think that's it. I think the people who are wanting to take over the planet are kind of going, well, it's the resources that we've spent, and there's, as there often is in these sorts of situations, a question mark over their intelligence, yeah, and these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, is that really speech? They
Yeah.
don't really look like people, do they?
Oh,
They're
they look
kind of,
very dangerous. Like there's that one picture
yeah,
that
they
gets sent out that
yeah,
people
if
sort
you
of react
see those
violently.
claws and this sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
thing, so and we've spent a lot of money on this, and Excite money for Excite homes and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
the other aliens I should mention are basically massive land octopuses. So I thought, what's like
Yeah.
visually the most opposite of guinea pigs? And I thought probably octopuses.
Yeah.
Again, I think not
Yeah,
until the end, I
I
don't
don't
think
think you say that outright, but yeah, yeah,
you
yeah. I
just
get.
get like many limbs and a sort of squelching sound. So hopefully that should sort of feel playful. I think I do call them octopodes at the end or something, just a kind of
Yeah, yeah.
throwaway line. But all of that is just having fun. Yeah. So I think with these books, you've got to bear in mind that the audience is going to be like 8 to 14. So
Mm-hmm.
I had quite so the bit where they attack the village. I wrote it a bit more Star Trek. And my editor came back and he said, right, we're not having a guinea pig massacre in this.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's
I
not
know, I
happening.
know.
Oh, okay. Actually, fair comments. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
dial that back a bit and just make it threat of violence, because singed fur and guinea pig bodies. So it's not really
Oh
a
man.
Doctor Who. It's a little bit more expanse, perhaps. Or
Mm-hmm.
little bit something else.
Doctor Who
So
fits. Oh gosh. Yeah,
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 exactly. We can't go to kind of guinea pig massacre. So but you've just you just, I mean, I was because of the kind of timing things I referred to at the start with Asylum, I was pretty much writing these books back to back. So I
Mm.
do know that I had been in Star Trek mode when I switched to kind of
Yeah,
writing
yeah.
bits of them. Yeah, yeah. So it was really funny of him to say, remember this is Doctor Who. Oh yes, you're quite right. Let's dial that and make it a little bit lighter. And it's definitely a lot of it's quite consciously Douglas Adams. There's kind of like planet building and
Hmm.
that sort of play, I think, and that kind of silliness which hopefully isn't silly, but feels a bit sort of it's playful. Yeah, the
Yeah.
universe is a joke. It's serious, but it's also a joke. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's Chirachar and the Ixites, as they're called.
Yeah. It's funny just hearing you talk about it. Like I obviously it makes sense, but just like the crossover between the two novels is very similar. Again, the in Strange New Worlds, the Yoxanans, again, also very furry creatures who are also, for lack of a better word, dehumanized or
Yeah,
depersoned, I
yeah, yeah,
guess, through like their
yeah.
looks or their difference from the dominant culture.
Lot of letter X's as well. Letter
Yeah.
X's had a good workout
So
this
many
year.
X's. I mean, hey, if you need to make an alien species, just give them a lot of X's and Y's and
Stick an X in it.
apostrophes.
Yeah, couple of
um,
exclamation marks. Yeah, you're
yep,
done.
yep, yeah, did it. Um, but kind of the other side of that is you have
Mm,
the, like you said, the octopi. I blanking on their name, but the species that sort of created them. And I loved your main character, who was sort of the scientist who
mm,
wanted to protect the experiment from the sort of colonization effort that was coming in. But still also kind of had that colonial mindset of like, oh, these are
mm.
experiments. They're things to study, and not also fully people. And so valuing them for
Yeah,
like the scientific curiosity and not as people.
yeah.
And again, you're thinking on like the balance, like this the duality of that. So
Yeah, exactly. And it's that they've been specimens to observe and rather than and it's habit, it's a habit of sort of process. And they've Tixel, isn't it? I've forgot the character's name now.
yeah, so,
Um uh
I
uh
wish I had it written
so
down, but I don't have it done.
yeah, yeah. I think did I manage to get away with they pronouns as
I
well
think so. I
before?
think you did. I believe I caught
Yeah,
that at one point.
I
Yeah.
think I did. I think I've got he's and she's for the little fairy guys, the Cavians. But I think
Mm.
the Ixites, I think I got away with they pronouns. So I think Tixel is just there's habits and processes and all of this, and it's never really. It's kind of got these things up and looked at them and studied them and sort of heart rates, but it's never sort of gone. Do you know what? Let's sit down and have a chat. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, let's
They
actually
needed
see if they're
needed
people to
more
study.
ethnography. They needed more sociologists. It was as simple as
Hmm.
that.
They really did. Get some Le Guin in here. I think we'll be good.
Yeah, there's some ethnographers or something. So yeah,
Hmm.
so but has never really stepped outside that mindset and taken the time to go, well, actually, what am I dealing with here? I remember I've just remembered something that I think this book was based on. I think I saw there was a COVID research unit that had been going for generations that was threatened with closure.
Hmm.
Uh, and that just seemed to be what were you going to do with these birds, which are really smart?
Hmm.
And of course, the woman who was running the lab was devastated,
Yeah, of
because
course. Yeah.
they're bright enough that you would know those birds individually, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that was something that fortuitously fed in. We've got the experiment is being closed down.
Yeah.
What would that mean, and what would that involve? Um, no guinea pigs are harmed
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the course of this book.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to ask about this book before we wrap out and go to Vonda before we have to finish up. Again, just sorry, I keep complimenting you. Though this is why you come here, right? You just want me to
Please,
just
yes,
gratitude you.
carry on.
Yeah, the real joy. Again, you always find these like core elements in these harder stories that I think are really beautiful, which is the desire to know another. Is I think a core
Yeah,
sort of theme throughout this. Like Chir wants to meet aliens. The whole reason this experiment exists is because the one species wants to meet. They think they're alone in the universe and want to know somebody else and get to like meet
yeah.
another species.
Hmm.
And the joy of the doctor within that. And so like it's I'm just curious if like how you weaved that all the way through, because even in this like, oh, this colonial mindset of like, let's just knock it all down and make homes, there's a
Mm,
core within the species of like, we want to get to know somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so I'm curious
yeah,
about
yeah.
your thinking about that theme.
Oh, that's a really big theme for me. So it's something I'm really, really interested in. So there's a philosopher called Levinas, and
Mm-hmm.
he says that kind of the way that we relate to each other, the kind of basis of ethics, is recognizing the other,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of meeting the other, because it sort of acknowledges them on their own terms, and at the
Mm-hmm.
same time puts you back in negotiation with yourself. Because if you acknowledge somebody else's selfhood, that will mean probably will mean having the courage to renegotiate your own selfhood in some way.
Yeah, yeah.
So a very simple example of this,
Mm-hmm.
for example, was the first time I heard the word trans and cis. And
Yeah.
and I went, cis? I've never heard this word before. This is not a label I would. Oh, let me hang on a minute and have a little think about this. Oh, I see how this works. Okay, yeah. I met someone on another terms, and I went, oh, I see how that works. Okay, all right. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's all right. It's not changed who I am. Just means that, this is the word that has meaning in relation to someone else. So that's sort of how I sorted it out in my head. I don't know whether that works or not, but that's how
Yeah,
it
yeah.
didn't seem a very difficult thing to do. And that
For some
seems to
people, it
me,
ends up being very hard, but
you would be amazed,
yeah.
wouldn't you? Yes, you really would be amazed at how hard some people find that. But that's okay. Well, let me not react in a negative way. Let me sort of go, okay, well, what does this mean, this relationship? And what does it mean to have that word uh apply to me or be a meaningful way to describe me? It's cost me anything. I've not changed, but it's sort of illuminated a relational way of being in the world with
Mm,
someone else whose experience is different. And if I accept that because they're telling me that, then that's sort of okay. That illuminates something about my place in the world.
yeah.
So that's kind of like basis of ethics for me. Um, as far as I understand this philosopher,
No,
who I've
no,
never
no.
I've
It's a.
never read. A friend of mine told me about this. And so it always becomes a theme in my books, is that I think people long for these kind of encounters,
Mm-hmm.
um, but are fearful about what that might mean if they
Mm-hmm.
admit the truth of somebody else's reality. And
Mm-hmm.
to admit the truth of somebody else's reality when it's not your truth, I think is particularly difficult. People are very threatened by that. It's all
Mm-hmm.
right, okay, Um, and then when you get that onto kind of like alien, well, I think what you're able to do in science fiction is sort of make a kind of um, metaphor of that, aren't you? Sort of put it
Yeah.
literally onto the alien. And once they start meeting each other on their own terms, and Chirachar calls the doctor out on this, says you're not, you're taking me for granted. You've got to meet me as a person, yeah, as
Mm-hmm.
as something that has needs and a sense of self and identity and rights in this relationship. And that's and these moments are always very touching for me, I think, in books, where I think when Tixlil and Chirachar finally meet, and Chirachar's like, all you needed to say was hello, yeah?
Yeah.
But you just needed to recognize me, and recognize my selfhood,
Mm,
not your selfhood, but selfhood.
yeah.
And if you can sneak that into a book for 10-year-olds, then
Yeah.
the 10-year-olds are all right.
They'll
They know
get
this
it.
stuff. They know
Yeah.
this stuff already, really, I think. So
Mm,
so that's why I love that kind of story. I think I'll probably come back to quite this, probably a little bit of that in Asylum as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, it very much so.
yeah.
And I think it is just a element that's just core to a lot of your work that I really do enjoy. It's just
So and
because, oops, sorry.
yeah, no, it's just I'm just thinking it. Yeah, and that's what the aliens do with each other in this book.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of go, oh look, there you are.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Yeah.
And the question continues. Yeah, yeah,
And the
yeah.
question continues, yeah.
Yeah.
And do I need to be threatened by this? No,
Mm-hmm.
no, I don't. Your meaning doesn't threaten my
Negate
meaning.
mine. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And the place we should be is there. This doesn't threaten me.
Mm-hmm.
It makes life richer and more diverse and more brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think
anyway,
that's
that's
yeah, no, no, it's the core thing that I often
Mm,
find is like people saying like, oh, your selfhood is somehow antagonistic or negating of mine, and that's sort of where a
mhm.
lot of conflicts come in. And it's like, no,
Exactly.
it does not have to be viewed that way. So
Exactly that. And I think the more we can say this, or try and say this,
Mhm.
Let's keep on saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, on that note, I do want to end a little bit of time
Mm,
because I know we're butting up on an hour here, but I do want to talk about your
yeah.
essay here.
Let's
So why Vonda M. McIntyre? Why were you fascinated by her? I know you've talked every single time I've heard you do
yeah.
an interview, you talked about her in some way. So I kind of know the answer, but I'm curious from your mouth.
Oh, so I guess I was approached to write an introduction for a reprint
Mm-hmm.
of one of her books, and I thought, oh, I haven't read this book. I've read her Star Trek books,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't read this one. And so I did read it. And I thought it was completely brilliant. Which is The Exile Waiting, which is her first book. And then I kind of we'd had one brief exchange, myself and Vonda McIntyre, which was after her best friend Ursula Le Guin died,
Mm-hmm.
and I had collated a lot of the news coverage in the UK,
Yeah.
and I emailed it to her, and she emailed back. But that was our only communication really. And the she died just before the reprints of the Exile Waiting came out, so she saw the cover but didn't see my introduction. And then as I kind of read, well, I'd read that one. To write that because I'm kind of, you know, okay, I'm writing an introduction to this book. This means I have to read everything. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so I
yeah. Got to go through it
kind
all.
of, you got to do it properly. You got to do it properly. So I read pretty much everything and started tracking down everything, like her short stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm very conscious is that it's very easy for a lot of writers to kind of start to slip away. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and she's so good that I just don't think she should slip away,
Mm-hmm.
or be allowed to slip away. I mean, there are many. I mean, the estate is incredible, and many people who sort of work quite, or Dreamstake in particular, I think people adore. Um, but any excuse I've got to kind of go, well, I want to talk about this writer, I'm going to write about this writer. So when the chance to um, do this essay came up, I said, okay, what I really want to write about is there'd been one very good essay that's written I think in the late 80s, possibly the early 90s, which had looked at her Star Trek books and drawn connections between her science fiction books. But since then, Vonda had published a lot
A lot
more.
more. Mm-hmm.
So I said, what I want to do is put, because we often have this antagonism set up between, tie-in fiction and real science fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let me look at these books as and often people say, oh well, Vonda McIntyre, she started so well. Oh, then she went into time fiction. You're right. Okay. Well, no, it doesn't work like that. Let's look at the whole body of work, and see how it works as a body of work.
Mm.
And the estate were wonderful. There's an unpublished novel called Curve of the World,
Oh.
and they let me read that. So they gave me access to her. She finished that just more or less just before she died. It's still not published. Scandalously, it's amazing.
Oh.
So let's get that one out.
Yeah.
So I was able to look from sort of first short story right the way through to her last unpublished novel, and go, okay, well what are the main things that kind of connect this whole body of work to her Star Trek work, and it's quite straightforward. Yeah, there's a very clear worldview, there's a very clear way of
Mm.
being in the world. It's a very Star Trek way of being in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But also Star Trek is quite a Vonda way of being in the world, I think. So
Yeah,
so I love her books, and I love her view worldview,
yeah.
and what that means for science fiction. So it was really good. I thought at one point I wasn't going to get this done, and the editor said, "Nope, you're not dropping out."
Need you. Yeah.
You're well, no, you've got to write this essay. We're not letting you not write this. They were quite right to push me through. I'm really proud of
Good.
it, and I'm really glad I got to do it. So, but I think it was in the, and they must have been having a terrible time. I think it was right in the middle of COVID, and everyone was going, all these commitments I made in 2019. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, yeah. It's like,
I'm
oh, I got
now
plenty of time.
I
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'll do that in Easter 2020. Ugh, what's
yeah.
going on? So it was one of those, but they said no. But you've got to write this. So
Yeah.
so they persuaded me to stay, and I'm really really glad I did. So if it gets anyone to read either her Star Trek books which were really high profile. Yeah,
I
they were
remember
big,
the
yeah,
first
big
adventure was
gigs.
one of my first books I ever read. Yeah, first Star Trek books I ever read.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
big deal, big hardback, big, big deal. And of course, the three movie novelizations,
Hmm.
Khan, Search for Spock, and Voyage Home. Um, and then if it gets you to kind of go and read like Dream Snake
Hmm.
or The Moon and the Sun, which won the award that year. Was it the Nebula? I think it won the Nebula.
I think that's what you said. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I haven't read it,
Yeah,
so I don't know. Yeah,
ahead of Game of Thrones, boys and girls in
yeah.
multi-forms. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's one of those interesting, sad things of just like a lot of like,
Mm,
especially women writers' contributions
mm,
get erased, especially when they're so foundational. I think not just her, but like Diane
exactly.
Duane was such a big influence on Star Trek,
Yeah.
and obviously DC Fontana and yourself. Not to say that you're being
Well,
erased. You are
try
indelibly
my
part of
best.
Star Trek now. So,
I am
but it
right back there into the pilots. Yeah.
yes, but it is one of those things that does tend to happen that we tend to overlook a lot of the contributions of women writers. So I really did appreciate that in you sort of
And
bringing her forward.
she's so, I think it really makes you go back to that 70s stuff and go,
Mm,
it wasn't all a certain kind of uh, uh, a certain kind of radical feminism. There were people writing there who were uh, they were writing about polyamorous relationships.
yeah. Oh, I
They were
loved that
right.
part of it.
Yeah,
Like Kirk
I
technically
know
isn't a
some.
weird
Yeah,
poly, or like there's a family that like passed around like raised kids in her books. It was really
yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah, and all the stuff about there'd be no problem with kind of fluidity in gender or
Hmm.
there'd be no nonsense about, oh, we're using pronouns, of course, if we need to then we'll do that. All of that is just there. She's very, very good in The Exile Waiting on disability
Hmm.
and what it means to be embodied in different ways.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
very, very good, and that book's from like 74, 75. It's really early.
Yeah.
And she's just great. It's really unfussy prose, a really thoughtful prose. She was roommates at Clarion with Octavia Butler. They
Oh
were,
wow. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They were sort of buddies, and it's very touching. After Butler dies, there's a very touching piece that
Mm.
Vonda writes about knowing her and how much she's missing her. Um, so
Oh, I'm
she's
sorry.
one of that kind of generation.
That's fascinating. I'll end on this, but I'm working on.
Mm,
I think I mentioned this to you before we
mm,
started recording. I'm working on a video for my own channel that's like, here
mm.
are some stories that have existed beyond like just the dominant sort of like monomythical Joseph Campbell, oh, oppressor versus
Yeah.
oppressed sort of narratives that have existed. And kind of one of the twists of the end of it is sort of like I spend most of it at the beginning being like, here's some
Mm.
franchise stories like Star Wars Andor or Deep Space Nine or Matrix Resurrections that kind of issue that. And I go, but like these stories have always existed and they've
Yeah.
existed for a lot longer than we have given them credit for. And in fact, have been able to like break free of sort of
Yep.
franchise stuff. And the examples I used were Le Guin and Butler are sort of like the two main ones. And it's just funny how
Yes.
there's this orbit of Vonda and
Yeah.
and like
I
yeah,
I think you would find Dreamstake incredibly interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because it's all about smashing binaries. The whole point of it is smashing binaries. It's like the structural principle
Well,
of it. Yeah.
I
It's
bought
really good.
I already bought a copy on your recommendation. I think you were on
Oh, have I
Positively
already
Trek.
plugged it? Yeah,
You
yeah, I
plugged it
remember.
somewhere on Positively Trek or somewhere like that where you were interviewed, and I was like, well, I'll pick that up. So I have a copy downstairs. I haven't gotten around to finishing yet, but yeah.
Oh, you will knock through it. It's so good. And it's in all her Trek stuff as well. You just see, oh, everything works in threes, doesn't it?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
There's no binaries here. There's something yeah. There's one of her characters, there's a kind of recurring character. There's always a character with something like Merritt or Mary or Meredith, and
mm,
the gender is never specified. You never
mm,
find out whether
interesting.
they are anything or whatever they are, or it's just not important for anyone to mention.
I'll have to read.
It,
Oh, sorry. No.
yeah, no, she's just great.
No, it's just last thing. Sorry, this is me just
Mm.
chatting with you now about my own writing nonsense. But yeah, it just goes to that idea we're talking about. People just find the same truths because like even a lot of my own film was dealing with the same thing of like the other. What I love about transgender writing is a very similar thing
Mm,
where we're talking about like finding the other, but with trans people, we
mm.
kind of have to find the other in ourselves first. Of like, oh, here's who I am, and here's the person I want
Yeah.
to be, and so you sort of see the other in your own self,
How interesting.
which
Yeah.
is another
Really, really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and then it connected in the film that I did about like
Mm,
threes of like man, woman, non-binary, and how that sort of breaks
mm.
all of that and things. So it's just interesting that these themes crop up in women writers, marginalized writers, things like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that come up. And again, it just goes that we're talking about like people, the truths of the human heart keep resurfacing.
Exactly. And in Le Guin, what I think very interesting is Le Guin has to go on a journey like that, where she has
Mm.
to
Oh,
recognize the
yeah,
the woman in herself. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
actually, I'm writing as a man.
yeah.
The criticisms of Left Hand of Darkness. No, that isn't truthful, is it? That's not actually right. Yeah, yeah. I need to
I
dig deep. Yeah. I
I
mean,
use her as such a great example of that because
mm,
there are certain other writers in women writers who are very certain of their greatness, let's just say, and it harms a lot of
yeah,
marginalized people. And what I love about Le Guin and a lot of writers are just like you can see the evolution of their own self throughout their
yeah.
work, and I think
and,
that's
and the courage it takes to kind of go, well, okay, I hadn't thought of that.
mm,
That's a really good point. What does that mean for what I've written so far?
yeah.
And what does it mean for what I might write going forwards? Because if I just dig my heels in, that's not thinking, is it? That's not you
Hmm.
creating. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know.
Believe me, I'm sure we're all thinking of the same.
Well,
So,
indeed, indeed.
uh, well, with that all said, I guess we'll wrap out because we've been talking for well over an hour at this point. So I just
Wow,
want to
absolute
say, yeah,
delight, though. Really enjoyed it. Thank
yeah.
you.
Of course, listeners, I'm gonna say this to the listeners because if I say it to you over and over again, you'll just keep flattering you. But listeners, I Una is fantastic. Seriously, one of my favorite authors. Most certainly my favorite author in the tie-in space. No shade at any of the others; they're also wonderful. But my personal favorite, but also just a favorite author in general. And you all should be reading her more. So if any of this is interested you, please go check out her work, especially Asylum, which is her latest one. But any of her work is fantastic. And Una, to you, thank you so much for being here and for doing this. It's always a
Absolute
pleasure.
privilege. Real pleasure. Thank you very much, Jessie. And always great questions. So
Oh, thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for writing things that provoke such good questions. Um, well, with all that said, everybody, I hope you all live long and prosper.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.